The renovations at Station Street were terrific, but a bit of a mistake in a way, because I just went in there and said, oh well, we need to rip this wall out and do this and pull that out, and there was a big hole in the floor. Now that I didn't do that, but when they had pulled down one of the chimneys in the house, they had all the bricks had been removed, so and that meant there was a space in the floor, and it had been covered over with some pretty ordinary stuff. So David and I pulled all that out, and then just threw the old for sale sign over the top of it so we could walk through the house and wheelbarrow stuff through. We ripped the bathroom and laundry apart, and the kitchen and the toilet out the back, and put in a new toilet in the back, a new bath in the bathroom with a shower, and it was all propped up by bits of wood and stuff like that, sort of temporary to hold it together. And we put in a laundry trough in the laundry, and a friend of David's, who was a bricklayer, had built a half wall in the laundry so that we could, so the bathroom was separate to the, separate to the laundry, and it was all a walk-through house except for the first two rooms. You walk down the hallway, there was a spare room on the left-hand side, there was our bedroom, and then there was these two walk-through rooms. One we used as a lounge room, one as a dining room, then the kitchen, which was also walked through, and then the laundry, which was also walked through. And out of the house there was a door out of the lounge room into this little laneway. There was a door out of the so-called dining room into the little laneway, and there was a door out of the kitchen into the little laneway, and a door out of the toilet laundry. So what we decided to do was block up all those doors except the one out of the laundry. And with Dave's bricklaying mate, we built a nice arch into the one in the lounge room, which had space for wine bottles underneath, and glasses and bookshelves and things above. The one in the dining room we just blocked up completely because we needed the wall space, and the one in the kitchen similarly. And we put in a new, well, relocated the old kitchen sink. It wasn't new, and there were drawers were out of the bag, and there was, in the dining room area, there was a big heap of rubble remaining. And it was, at this stage, it was time for us to go over to Adelaide and get married, or me to go over to Adelaide and get married. So Chris hadn't seen all this mess that we'd done until after we came home from the wedding. Our honeymoon consisted of driving back from Adelaide to Melbourne via car and going down through Mount Gambier and what have you. Now, it was meant to be a quiet wedding, but all of my relatives from Melbourne came over, because all of Mum's relatives were in Melbourne, and all of Christine's relatives, and her dad had 5 brothers and sisters, so there were quite a few people, and there were quite a few friends. And we had a reception at Christine's auntie Bub, as they call her, Auntie Irene, and the reception was at her place, because according to Mavis, Chris's mum, they had a lovely garden, and this would be a lovely place for the wedding, and because they had such a lovely garden, and it would all be lovely. And at the same time, Christine's mum had a lovely garden, and it really was lovely. But anyway, I brought the beer over from Melbourne for the wedding on the Saturday. Oh, well, I drove back from Melbourne with my brother Peter, who was going to be best man. He was based in Bendigo at the time, so I picked him up, and we arrived at Christine's house at about 11:30, and I wasn't allowed to see her the night before the wedding, but that didn't make any difference because when I used to arrive from Melbourne at about 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, I'd go straight to her place and she'd come out the front and I'd get a peck on the cheek. And, hello, how are you? And then go into the house and you'd have to sit on the other side of the couch. It was really unusual. But her family were not very demonstrative, and she was worried that, people might think that there was something going on between us. Talk about a laugh. There was nothing going on between us like anything untoward that anybody should be ashamed of. So it was really just funny. But Pete took the wedding ring in and made sure that it fitted her. And the next morning we drove up, Pete and I drove up to, because we stayed at my mum's place, we drove up to Auntie Irene's place, which was in Richmond somewhere, and it was a very plain house. I'd never been there before. Very plain house, a square buffalo lawn in the front, not a tree or a shrub to be seen. And I thought, oh well, maybe out the back it's all lovely. There's a beautiful garden all out the back. No, there was a vegetable patch out the back. And anyway, I stuck the beer in the fridge and went home, and we happily got married on that day. It was a nice day. A nice way weather-wise, considering it was 25th of January. And then we had our first night at the Murray Bridge Hotel. And we had to push the beds together because they were two single beds, the usual thing. Anyway, we set off and drove down. I think the next stop was in Narracourt, or no, not Narracourt, or a little stop last stop before Mount Gambier. The name is out of my head at the moment, but I don't think it was Narracourt. Anyway, we went into the motel that night, and blow me down, sitting in the lounge of the motel it was, sitting in the lounge was a fellow that I'd been on the ship with, and his family. So we met them and had a bit of a chat, and had a nice time, and they were surprised when they found out we'd only been married 2 days. So they said, oh yeah, well, we don't want to interrupt anything, and blah, blah, blah. The next morning we go down to breakfast, and the only people in the dining room were this family that I'd re-met the night before. My Auntie Jean and Uncle Jim and Auntie Gwen and all of our friends, all of who'd been at our wedding, they were all there, and one of my customers from Melbourne. There was nobody else in the whole motel. We knew everybody in the place. So, hiding away for the honeymoon was not on the list. So the next night, the family said to me, now, where are you going to stay tomorrow night? We'll try not to stay there. It was funny. But we had a nice time, and came back home and got to Melbourne, to our new house, with, I suppose it had been 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And anyway, we went in and had a bit of a look, and Christine saw this big old sign on the lounge room floor that she had to walk across to save herself falling down a hole. Went into the kitchen. There were no kitchen drawers in the kitchen bench, and she said, where are the drawers? Where are the drawers? And I said, oh, they're around here somewhere. And I went out, and they were on top of this pile of rubble in the dining room, and I couldn't understand why she burst into tears. But we had made a mess of the place. But in the meantime, Uncle Mac had installed the new electrical switchboard and enough power points in the kitchen and the laundry and the bathroom and all of those places where we needed power points so that we had electricity. I mean, I paid him for the job, but he did it at a very cheap price, of course, and didn't disturb. He said, I won't disturb any of the the lights because they're on the old power system, and I don't want to change any of that. So that, well, it was really quite good. And then blow me down, knock on the door, which was completely unexpected. It was Jean and Jim and David and Gwen, and they just wanted to come and see, how we got on and, do anything they could to make the place a little bit more comfortable, which was interesting. But as I sit in this very fancy dining room of this very fancy old house that we're living in, I'm reminded of that house, our first house. We didn't have a refrigerator. We had an esky, and I used to bring home ice from work every night and put it in the esky. We didn't have a washing machine. We'd go around to the local laundromat. We had the old gas cooker. We had luckily friends had given us, most of my friends gave us very practical gifts, like Margaret and Alan Bickmore, who I haven't mentioned, but they are friends since I was 12 years old. They gave us a very fancy kettle, and the Butcher family, who are also friends from childhood, they were friends of Mum's and Dad's, who were my friends until they died. The Butchers, they gave us a casserole dish, and my aunt had given us a crockery set, and another aunt had given us a set of saucepans. And Auntie Jean and Uncle Mac had given us a set of champagne glasses, which was terrific. No, they were all terrific. But it was really interesting because Christine said to me, fancy giving me a dinner set. I should have been able to choose it. And I worked out that in their family, they didn't buy gifts unless everybody knew what the gift was going to be. And in my family, you got a gift, and whatever it was, you were grateful that that's what you got. And I thought it was fantastic that we had all this stuff. And it was too. But we had a very interesting early married life, trying to renovate the house. David and I put on a new roof because this newly renovated house that we'd bought, we'd done all the real renovations we'd done, and we got into the first time it rained in Melbourne after we'd been married. We found out that the newly renovated house didn't include holes in the roof because we're in bed and the rain was falling on the bed just about as fast as it was falling outside. So again, David had repaid his debt by helping me put on a new roof. We worked on that together. It was really, really a labour of love, and we turned that house from a very run-down little shack to a very, very nicely turned out cottage. And having paid $2,750 and a lot of labour in it, when we sold it for $32,000 because the area where we were living, which when I first suggested to my Auntie Gwen and Uncle Jim that that's where we were going to buy a house, and they said, "Oh, you don't want to live there, there's all those Dagos live there," meaning Italians. And we found it lovely that we lived amongst all these Italians. They were just wonderful people and very hospitable and generous, and they all had friends who lived in the country who would bring boxes of tomatoes and all that sort of stuff. It was great. And while we were there, I kept working at Schaefer, and I was doing pretty well. I was the top salesman or joint top salesman 2 or 3 times in a row. And but while we were there, I saw an advertisement for Rank Xerox, and they were offering to pay quite a large amount of money in comparison to what I was earning. The deal at Schaefer was that I got £25 a week, which was good, $25 a week by then. That's right, the dollars changed over while I was away overseas. Peter sent me an Australian $1 bill while I was there. We came back and I was getting paid $25 retainer, and the rest was 4% commission on sales, which meant I was earning good money and we were happy. And Chris had got a job out in near Toorak in Melbourne, working for a kidney specialist. So that was, we were doing okay, but when I saw this ad for Xerox, they were talking about paying you as much as I was earning just as a retainer. So I made some investigations into that, and next thing you know, I had a job with Rank Xerox as a sales trainee. And that required me going to Sydney for 4 weeks initial training, staying in a I hopped on the plane, they flew us to Sydney, went from Essendon. Chris drove me out to Essendon, and we took off for Sydney, and I got off the plane and I was waiting for a taxi, and there was a really tall guy waiting for a taxi next to me, and he looked at me and I looked at him, and I said g'day, and he said, oh, blah blah blah, and I said, where are you headed for? Because the taxis were pretty scarce, and he said, oh, I'm going out to North Sydney. And I said, oh, so am I. Would you like to share a taxi? And he said, yeah, I've just started with Rank Xerox. And I said, oh, well, so have I. And that fella's name was Graham McCormack, and he became one of my Xerox friends who remains part of a little team called Grime, Bile, Hairy and Fat Al, which was Grime for Graham McCormack, Bile for Billy McLennan, who used to tell Billy's jokes, so he was Bile. Hairy was me because I had a beard, and Fat Al or Fatal for Alan Kensholt, because A, Alan was a little bit overweight, and B, he used to always be saying things were fatal. Oh, that was fatal. So Bile, Grime, Hairy and Fatal. Very, very interesting time, but the motel, when we got to the motel in Sydney, it was an absolutely fantastic brand new motel, and I had a room to myself which was about as big as our house, and it overlooked the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It was just absolutely breathtaking, I thought, and the sales training was rigorous, and it turns out that I was top of the class, so I must have had the right answers even if I didn't know that much about selling. But we learned a lot about Xerox, and back to Melbourne, and started work at Xerox in Lonsdale Street. And it wasn't easy. It was a tough gig, but it was really interesting, and if you did reasonably well, even if you did moderately well, you made a good income. And well, the time at Xerox was interesting. I was there for 7 years, including selling, and then 2 years in sales training and personnel, which I really enjoyed. And whilst I was working at Xerox in 1972, our daughter Naomi was born. It was a big happy occasion. All of the neighbours in our little street, we were the only Australians in that whole block, and they were all thrilled to bits that we were having a baby, and they all came in good and guard, and we had a lovely time. So it was really interesting. Naomi was christened by our very good friend John Stockdale at the church where we attended in Thornbury, which I'd been attending ever since I moved to Melbourne. And John was a really interesting character, and his wife Shan, they became lifelong friends. And they taught us a lot about wine, which was it was their passion, and it became our passion, and especially drinking champagne every time you walk in the front door. That was really, very nice time. Towards the end of my time at Xerox, we decided that we were going to do a trip to the top end of Australia, and we bought a second-hand Land Rover, and I spent a lot of time kitting it out with another friend from Xerox, Graham Lee, and we left Melbourne from our new house in Brunswick. Because Naomi had come along, we really needed a bigger house. We only had the little front room, and that was where we used to have guests staying. And on one guest, well, we had many guests. People always came to Melbourne, they'd stay with us. But the one guest was Chris's dad, and I was talking to him about stripping the front door of the little cottage and getting it back to the original wood. And we just had that discussion. One day I came home from work, and there was this beautiful front door all in original wood. And I thought, gee, how did you do that in one day? And he said, oh, it's painted. And what he did, because he was an expert at his trade, he had painted the front door to look like it was old oak, and it looked terrific. So then he took on the job of painting the front of the house, and we painted it a deep dark blue, and he painted right at the top an English cabbie, a horse-drawn cab from last century. It really looked lovely. It made the house look fantastic. But because we had Naomi, we had to start looking for another house. And there we were when we first bought the house in Carlton. People had said, oh, don't buy there, it's full of Italians and everything else, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. We couldn't afford to buy a bigger house in Carlton. It was just too expensive. And we'd sold our house for a really good price, so we started looking nearby, and we found a house in Brunswick, Park Street, Brunswick. And we went to the auction. We had a look at the house and we thought, wow, this will do us. It was a 2-storey, huge place, big front room, like lounge room, drawing room if you like, big room behind that, then a dining room area, and then a kitchen downstairs, and again a little lobby area with a toilet and laundry, and then quite a large yard in comparison to our one in Carlton. And upstairs a very large room that ran right across the front of the house, with a bedroom behind, and then down a short flight of steps, then a bathroom and 3 more bedrooms. And it really was a good house, we thought, for us, and would accommodate all our visiting people. So we went to the auction, and we went with our friends Margaret and Graham McCormack, Barbara and Graham McCormack, and we went to the auction with them, and the price was getting a bit high, and we weren't sure how we would go with paying for it. We had spoken to our bank, and they were quite happy to lend us, give us a second mortgage while we sold our place and everything else. And then when the bidding on the house got a bit slow, the owner of the place told the agent that they would lend, I think it was $10,000 at 7%. And that wasn't a bad deal at the time. People complain now about interest rates being high. That was pretty good interest. We thought that was pretty good interest. So we thought, oh, well, we can bid. And the bidding slowed right down, and we got it for $45,000, which was really quite a buy. And all of our friends helped us to move. We sold our house fairly quickly. The Station Street, we bought this house and moved in, and that's where Naomi spent most of her childhood, and that's where we left on this fantastic trip to the top of Australia. And when we were going, we took both Mavis and Dulcie on us this trip. We had 3 months off work. I'd negotiated 3 months off work from Xerox, and our friends John and Shan were there to see us off. We'd had dinner at their place the night before with champagne and wine flowing freely, and the next day they came to see us off. And we had a wonderful trip. It's too long to go into here, but crossing rivers in the north of Australia, driving right to the top, walking through rivers that are now crocodile infested, but in those days the crocs had all been shot out, camping everywhere. We went with another couple of people who also had Land Rovers, whom we'd met beforehand, and then another part of the trip we were accompanied by a couple of young blokes on motorcycles who we met along the way. It really was a fantastic adventure. Memories, millions of memories of that trip, and Naomi learning to speak along the way. I can remember we were calling into our friends Sylvia and Danny Beamer in Sydney. We stayed at Katoomba in the Blue Mountains the night before. We were just staying wherever we felt like. We had a Land Rover with a camping trailer behind, and part of that journey, we just stopped wherever we felt like. Other times we would stay at a hotel if we just thought we needed a break and access to showers. But we were staying at Jenolan Caves. Interesting thing happened there. We went down to the caves to have a look at the caves, and of course it was midwinter, so nobody was there. And we parked in the top car park, and we were going to go off and look for a camping spot. But first we went down to a night tour of the caves, and everybody thought we were staying in the hotel because that's where everybody stayed. And we went around on the tour. I don't think we even had to pay for the tour because they just thought we were part of the group from the hotel. They took us around. We had all this thing. We came out. It was getting dusk, and we walked up to the car park, the second car park. We were the only people in the car park. There were 3 or 4 cars in the car park down the bottom near the hotel. And I said, well, look, why don't we just leave everything linked up? We'll open up the camping trailer and we'll stay right here. And the arrangement was that Dulcie slept on a bunk in the Land Rover, and Chris and I were on one side of the camping trailer and Mavis was on the other, and Naomi in there with us too. During the day, Naomi could, if she wanted to have a lay down, she was just getting on too. If she wanted to lay down, she would get into the bunk. We'd let the bunk down with Dulcie and Mavis sitting in the back, and the bunk would come down and Naomi could be strapped on that. I'd set it up with seat belts and everything, so Naomi could safely ride along in the back of the thing and have a sleep. Well, when Naomi was really tired, she knew that she didn't want to sleep in the truck. She'd say, I'm not tired in the fruck, I'm tired in the frailer. But staying with Danny and Sylvia, they had a little merry-go-round arrangement that they had with one of their kids. They had 4 boys, and this thing was coming down. And the first words that Naomi put together when she looked at it was, and she said, coming down, coming down. Well, that was the start of her conversation, and it hasn't stopped since. But that trip was fantastic, and it led to a big incident because I'd been wearing a beard, as I said, when I was overseas. I shaved it off to get the job at Schaefer, and when I got married, I came back and went one day on my own to visit Christine's grandma. Don't ask me why I was there on my own, but I did. And she called in, and I just let the beard grow because the reason I'd done that was I was on holidays, and I always used to, when I was on holidays, not shave and not wear a watch and not wear a pen. I had very fancy pens and fancy watches and jewellery that I had to wear during the week, and wear a suit. And on a weekend I used to like to just wear shorts and everything. Anyway, I'd had a month off over Christmas. We weren't getting married until the end of January, so I'd had my time off over Christmas. I'd come back and we were, and I visited. Of course, Chris and I were out all the time together. We used to have wonderful times going to various places. Most of the time when we went out together, we were out at a play or something like that. Sometimes to the movies, sometimes to the drive-in. it was really nice. But I had this beard, and her grandma said to me, "You're going to leave the beard on for the wedding? It looks very nice on you." And so I said, "All right, I will." And I went back to Melbourne with the beard on, and the boss looked and said, "Oh, wow, that's a bit unusual." And I said, "Well, lots of people were wearing beards then. It wasn't that thing." And he was a bit taken aback. But anyway, he said, "Well, if your customers don't complain," and I went in and saw my girlfriends in Myers and all those places, and they said, "Oh, that looks nice." So I just said, "Well, nobody's complained yet. If you get any complaints, let me know." Nobody gave a damn. And the same as when I was at Schaefer and I first started wearing shorts in the summertime. The boss said to me, "Oh, you're not in South Australia now, because then Don Bannon, who was the Premier, was really getting annoyed about having to get dressed up in suits to go to work in Parliament. So he one day wore a pair of pink shorts to work, just to really shock everybody. And that got a trend going where people wore shorts and socks. But that's another story. The return from the big trip. Dulcie survived the big trip all the way, but Mavis jumped off when we came down from the top. She got off in Cairns and went and saw her relatives who were up there, and then headed back home. That wasn't the plan, but that's the way it worked out. Mavis, I don't know that she ever really understood what we were trying to do, I suppose, or what we were going to do on that trip, but her idea was that we were supposed to head straight for Cairns and be there in the warmth and see her sister-in-law up there, who was one of her aunts who I never took to. You'll notice I never mentioned any Christmas presents from Christine's side of the family, because they were so minimalistic you wouldn't have known they ever existed. And from this aunt, every time we used to see her after that, she'd say, "Oh yes, I haven't got you a wedding present yet." Well, she's dead now, we still haven't got the wedding present. And it really didn't matter, but just that sort of... anyway, let's not dwell on that sort of rubbish. But we came back from that, and I had a beard. And again, I went straight back to work, and there was a new state manager when I got back to work at Xerox. And I had this hairy beard all over, hairier than it is now. It hadn't had a haircut for 3 months. And so I went and got it nicely trimmed. I said to the boss when I saw him, I said, "Oh, well, the beard's a bit wild, but, blah, blah, blah." I met the new bloke and he seemed all right. So I went and got my beard trimmed and went back to work. And I got called in by the sales manager and said, "What's with the beard?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's a beard. That's what it is." I had one before, so this guy chose to make it a big issue because the state manager didn't like beards for some reason or other. Later on, I found out it was because one of his son-in-laws who he didn't like had a beard. So shave yours off, Andrew. Anyway, cut a long story short, they're all long stories. I was put through a bit of purgatory over refusing to shave my beard off. Now, I wasn't working in sales then, I was working in training. It wasn't going to have any effect on anybody. But luckily for me, the training function had been transferred out of the control of the state manager 3 or 4 months before I got back. So I was actually working for head office, not for the state branch. So the state manager couldn't sack me. And he obviously got on to Sydney, and they said, "Well, you can't sack a guy for having a beard. If we were going to do that, we'd have to sack half the Sydney staff." A silly part was that Dick Sylvester, who was the managing director of the whole of Rank Xerox, came out from England for a visit, and 3 of his staff that he brought with him all had beards. Anyway, Skinner was the name of the state manager. He backed off from the beard stuff, but not his sales manager, and he used to make my life hell. And he would give me jobs to do for training. He would say, "I want you to go and train this fella in Gippsland, and he'd make appointments for me to start working in Gippsland at 9 o'clock in the morning, make an appointment to see a customer at 9 o'clock, or make an appointment to see somebody in Warrnambool at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then he decided that the car I was driving was owned by the state, not by National Office, so that would have to be a carpool, so I'd have to go to the carpool, and then he'd arrange conveniently for all the cars in the carpool to be booked out that day. So then I'd have to borrow a car off one of the others, all this sort of stupid stuff. Wilson, his name was. It was just crazy. And he would write me memos and I'd write memos back. And then one day I got a call from head office, from the Chief of Personnel in Sydney, and he just quietly said, Harold, we know what's happening. Please just continue in your job. Do it as well as you can. Take no notice of what they do. But don't write any more memos. He said they'll get you into more trouble than anything else. So I decided, as I was running the staff magazine and the national, the Victorian part of the national magazine, every time I got a chance I would praise up, if they had a good selling month, I'd talk about this Wilson bloke, Wilson and the team, had top sales again, blah, 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 congratulations. And in the end, because I was always saying nice things about him, never said anything against him in the office. My friends knew what was going on. If I got into a lift with him, he wouldn't say boo to a goose, and they'd offer me other people in the lift, and I'd get in the lift and I'd say, good morning, Wilson, whatever his name was, good morning, and good morning to everybody else, and they'd all say good morning. He wouldn't say anything. And in the end, it got to people saying, what's wrong with you? Not what's wrong with Harold, what's wrong with you? Anyway, that led to me leaving. When just before I left, I was thinking about leaving, and just before I left, I got a huge cheque in the pay, and I rang up personnel, the local personnel person whom I knew, and said, what's this? And he said, I don't know, you'll have to ring Sydney. I rang Sydney, and they said, oh, you'll have to talk to the chief personnel manager. And he said, that's just a little reimbursement for all the crap you've been put through, which was very nice, but it didn't deter me from thinking after 7 years it was time for me to move on from Xerox. So I got a job as training and personnel manager at Sperry Univac Australia, which later became Remington Office Machines, and the state manager there was Ivan Short, and he and I got along very well, and I used to have an office on the first floor and training, and he desperately needed like a deputy state manager. So he moved me right up next door to his office, and he had a PA next to him. So it was his office, PA, and my office. And I wasn't officially the deputy state manager, but that's virtually what I was. And I hadn't been there all that long. Then I got called into Ivan's office, and he said, oh, look, we've just had an application for a salesman from a person by the name of Skinner, Pat Skinner. He used to work at Xerox. And I said, oh yes, he used to be the state manager. Now, I still had my beard, of course. Shorty said, oh, what do you know about him? And I said, oh, quite a bit, actually, blah, blah. And he said, oh, well, I want you to sit in on the interview. And I said, no, look, it'd be better if I don't sit in on this interview. Well, there was another guy who was really good, one of the other managers. He sat in on and I said, I know him, you need to make your decision about whether you want him or not. And he said, is there anything against me employing him? And I said, no, nothing that I know of. So anyway, the next sales meetings, there was a sales meeting every second Monday morning, and I used to run all the sales meetings. I wasn't the deputy, but occasionally Shorty would come in and say a few words. But that morning I said to Shorty, make sure you come in sometime during the day, sometime during the meeting. Anyway, I came in, sitting in the front row as Pat Skinner, and he saw me walk in, and I could see the look on his face. Oh, what am I in for here? And I just blah, blah, blah. And I said, now, this morning I want to welcome 2 new salesmen. One of them was Pat Skinner, blah, blah, blah. And then Ivan Short came in and, gave a bit of a blurb and gave me a big wrap up, and I could see Skinner looking at it thinking. But afterwards, after the meeting, he said, oh, I didn't know you were working here. And I said, makes no difference to me, Pat. You do your job, I do my job. Just get on with it, He didn't stay all that long. He developed into an alcoholic, unfortunately. I had no grudge against him. The person who'd been it was his feeling that he didn't like beards, that's sure. But it was Wilson who'd been the perpetrator of most of the crap. So I had no problems with that. During that time, whilst we were working at Xerox, Chris had moved from her job out on the domain and moved to work for the Professor of Surgery at Royal Melbourne Hospital, and Professor Bennett. And when Naomi was born, Chris used to take Naomi to work in a carry basket, and that just didn't work for that long because it was awkward. But there was no childcare in those days, and Chris and I got involved in developing a childcare centre in Brunswick, which was just 4 doors up from our house, and I became the president, and we were part of the organising committee, and various people did a lot of work, and we got a childcare centre established. The irony of it all was that Naomi was never in the childcare centre. Chris stayed home for a while and looked after the baby while she grew up, and we made many friends in Parkville. Naomi started school at Parkville Primary School and made many friends, including Jack Hibbert and his wife, or his ex-wife, the playwright, and very, very interesting times. And Chris and I used to go to the pram factory on a regular basis. We were regulars in Carlton before Carlton became the place that it is now. It was just a great life for us, and we were independent. We had lots of relatives, aunts and uncles in Melbourne whom we saw, and my friend and cousin Jean and Jim, they were friends. But they moved off to the country at one stage, and so did Dave and Gwen Haddo. David decided to give up being a plumber and move into being a teacher at TAFE, which he did. Jean was a social worker and Jim was the teacher, so Jim got moved out into the country. But that made it interesting because we would go and visit them at their place, and we'd have a great time. During the time that we were living in Brunswick, our friends Barbara and Graham McCormack liked the area we were, and they bought a house, 2-storey house, 3 houses down from us. So that was great. And then one night, we were always in one another's pockets. We would go out together, and they had no children, but they thought Naomi was wonderful. And one night Graham said to me, I'm going to University High School. And I said, what are you doing that for? And he said, I'm just like studying, I'm going to get my higher school certificate. And I said, And he said, why don't you come with me? And I said, all right. And I said, what are you studying? And he said, economics and politics. And I said, all right, okay. Well, I came along, and so I enrolled in economics and politics. And halfway through the year, they came round and handed out pieces of paper for university applications. And I said, what's this for? And the politics teacher said, oh, well, if you do well at the end of the year, you'll be able to get into Melbourne University if you want to. You'll get an adult HSC. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, oh, well, you've got to get higher than a B, which A's, that was run in numbers then, A, B, C, D, E. And he said, you've got to get higher than a B in both topics, and you've got to pass a special English test. And I said, oh, what's the English test? And he said, oh, you know, you can write an essay. He said, you'll pass the English test without any trouble. So I said, oh, all right, I'll fill out the form. Well, no skin off my nose. I filled out the form. And came the end of the year, I did quite well in the exams, and then the politics teacher said, well, now you've got to go and do the special English test. You get 2 goes at it. So I went along and I wrote an essay and did a couple of other things. I was no good at grammar. My grammar was perfect, but I wasn't able to explain what grammar was. I couldn't tell you what it was. But that didn't matter because they just asked you to write and parse things, not parse them. What is it when you cut down an article from one length to the other? Anyway, I did it and I thought, oh, well, I don't know how well I did, but I passed. So next thing you know, I get an offer to go to Melbourne University. So that was interesting and a bit of a thrill for a guy who'd left school when he was 14. So I went off and I asked Xerox, because they were encouraging people to get educated, higher education. So I said, oh, I wanted to do psychology. And that was related to my job then as in personnel and training. But they said, oh, it'd be good if you did something like economics as well. So I enrolled in economics and psychology and politics, and did a major in economics and a major in psychology. Well, that was an interesting time. Worked hard because I was working as well full time, changed jobs, moved house, did all those things. And towards the end of my degree, I had 3 topics to do in the second semester, which meant normally 2 topics in one semester, 1 topic the next. Just at that time, there were a lot of changes going on at Sperry Univac Remington office machines, and Shorty called me into his office and said, well, 2 things are going to happen. He said, I'm leaving, and he said, your job as training is going to be, he said, the new guy that's coming in has been involved in training and he wants to do it himself. So he said, your job's going to disappear from here. And I said, oh. And he said, but that doesn't mean you're going to lose your job. He said, I'm sure they'll offer you something. Well, they did. They offered me a job in Sydney, or a job in Bougainville, or a job in Port Moresby. So Chris and I talked about that a lot. And the guy from Port Moresby came down and interviewed me, and he said he'd love me to come and work with him in Port Moresby. It'd be great, and I would be the second in charge, and I'd be looking after all the training and training Indigenous people to take over the jobs, which was really attractive. But we were almost on the verge of making a decision to do that, and they were going to help with house relocation and all that sort of stuff. And we were trying to work out, would we sell the house, would we rent it, what would we do? And then in the middle of it all, Chris said, if we do this, we'll never go back home to Adelaide. And that had always been our mantra from the day we got there, was that one of these days we were going home to Adelaide. Now, it took 17 years, but at that point we decided, you're right, if we don't move now, she said, you'll do that job and you'll do well, and then they'll offer you a job somewhere else, and then it'll be somewhere else, and then it'll be somewhere else. So we took the plunge and thought about it, and the guy from Port Moresby was disappointed, and Shorty said, I hope you know what you're doing. But I resigned from Remington and went to university full-time to complete my degree, which I overloaded and did three topics. And by that stage, Christine had gone back to work, and she was working at the Royal Women's Hospital and doing very well, as she always does in her jobs. And she'd also had a little business that she started in Parkville while Naomi was young and started to go to school. And it used to work out really well because Chris didn't open the shop until 10 o'clock in the morning, and then she would stick a sign on the door saying back in 10 minutes, which it was, from Parkville down to Parkville to pick up Naomi from the Parkville Primary School, and then bring Naomi back, and we had a space there where Naomi could play and do all her things. And it was a great life for her. So what happened was Chris went full-time at the Women's and Children's. And that supported us. I finished the degree, and I used to then go and run the shop. Now, that was easy because I could walk out of the university lecture theatre and be in the shop in 5 minutes. That was how it was right in the university precinct. And it was relatively easy. I say relatively easy. We had an aunt, Auntie Vi, Bob's wife. She helped out in the shop when I couldn't. And that worked out really well. And at the end of the year, we sold the house, got a very good price for having paid $45,000 for it. We either got $80,000 or $85,000 for the Brunswick place. And whilst I was doing university and everything else, we bought a couple of houses in Melbourne, in Fitzroy and Brunswick, just in case when we moved back to Adelaide, it all went wrong. We thought, well, we'll have some stand in the Melbourne real estate market. And one of the things when we told Mavis that we were moving back, she said, "You don't want to move back to Adelaide? Adelaide's finished." And I said, well, that's good, because we prefer that to Melbourne, because Melbourne's never going to be finished. It's always being built. So anyway, we moved back, and I then did a degree at Adelaide University, an honours degree in psychology. And again, I did that. That was the first one that I'd done full time. But I was working at Reuben's shop, all the time. Weekends I'd be working at the shop and all that sort of stuff. Chris stayed home with Naomi for the first bit, and then got a part-time job with a doctor whose name escapes me at the moment, but I can see his face, and I later became a patient of his. Jeffrey Gibson, there he is, Jeffrey Gibson. And she worked for him part-time. I worked at Reuben's, finished the degree, and then started looking for a job. And because I was a mature age student, there weren't very many jobs for psychologists for a start off in Adelaide. And those that were all for trainees, which was all right, I would have been a trainee. But they all saw this 40-year-old guy coming in. It was much different to having a 21-year-old good-looking young chick walk in and look for the job, so I found it difficult. And there weren't many advertised. And then we had gone to church at St Jude's, not St Jude's, Semaphore, doesn't matter, Anglican church in Semaphore, from the time we'd moved back to Adelaide. And I forgot to say, the day we left Melbourne, who was there to send us off with a glass of champagne was John and Shan. They came to see us off from Melbourne. But yes, we'd gone to this church in Semaphore, and one of the guys there, I was talking to him, he was a priest also, his name was Harry Morrow, and he said, have you found a job yet, Harold? And I said, no, I'm still looking around. And I'd been offered a sort of a help out, do some work pretty well for nothing, and maybe something will come up, but it would look good on my CV if I'd done it. And I was thinking about that, but also thinking about how we're going to make ends meet. I mean, we had made we had money in the bank because we'd sold our house in Brunswick for a good price, and we were getting rent on the houses that we bought and renovated. So we were doing, okay, but it was a struggle. So anyway, Harry said, oh well, look, there's a job going to be advertised on the weekend, you should apply for it. And I said, oh, okay, but, so I saw it, and it was for Anglican Childcare Services, the administrator of Anglican Childcare Services, and it was a 3-year contract. So off I went to St Barnabas building in the city, a poky little office in a dingy old building that was, 100 years past having a renovation, and I was interviewed by Harry Morrow, who told me to apply for the job, and John Milne Dibben, who was a really nice chap. He was the chairman, and Alder Hall, who was the deputy chair. And so I got a job at Anglican Childcare Service. And that was a momentous decision, even though we didn't know at the time. It was a momentous decision because one way or another it led to us adopting Brett, our son, who was 8 years old at the time and was, I think incarcerated is the right word, in St Mary's Home for Children. We hadn't been able to have other children. Chris had had an ectopic pregnancy and been involved in the experimental IVF programs in Melbourne with Professor Carl Wood, and that hadn't been successful. So we were happily going along with one child and understood that we were too old to adopt another. We had talked about it, but it was just not going to happen because my cousin Jean was working in the adoptions branch in Melbourne at the time, and she just said, no, you're too old. So here I was running a children's home, well, 3 children's homes, the St Mary's Home for Children, Kenyon House Boys Home, and the Orphan Home of Adelaide out at Springfield. And there were kids all over the place. And they were all troubled in one way or another. And one day I was talking to one of my colleagues, and they said, would you consider fostering a child? We've got a little boy who's going to be very difficult to place, and he's had all sorts of issues, and he really needs a stable foster placement. So I said, oh, I had never thought of it. I said, we're too old. And he said, oh no, he's classed as a special needs kid, so you won't be too old. And I said, oh, so I went home and talked to Chris, and we had a long chat about it, and then we found out who this little boy was, and his name was Brett Smith, and we saw him in St Mary's and had a look at him from afar in the playground, and he looked like a bright spark of a kid. So we made the decision that we would have a look at the fostering. And we went through all the rigmarole, and the department said, well, if you foster him for a year, he could be available for adoption. So we said, no, okay, that's fine with us, because we were thinking of it as a long-term placement anyway. He'd had so much trauma in his life already. He'd been fostered before, he'd been in 2 or 3 placements, he'd been in and out of St Mary's Home for Children and other placements. He really needed some stability. And the stability he got was that right at that very time we were planning on a trip to the United States to meet our old friends Vic and Georgina Cleland, who had moved to America many years before after their sojourn in England, and we were going to go and visit them and go to Disneyland and do all those things. And the Department of Children's Services said, oh, well, you may want to go on your trip first and then foster him when you come back. And we said, what, tell a kid that you've just been to Disneyland? No. So we took Brett with us. They said, good luck. And it was a terrific trip, and it was a great way to get to know Brett. But it was also very trying because Brett went through all the normal processes that a child does who's just been adopted, to try and break it all down, because that's what had happened before. He'd broken the adoption or broken down the placement. So that's what kids do. But it was a great trip, and he's a great son. Yes, very interesting. But all through all this, we had moved back to Adelaide, bought a house at Largs Bay. We didn't do a lot of renovating at Largs Bay, except two major projects. One was to remove an obnoxious looking cactus garden built into a fireplace in one of the rooms, which we used as a family room. And Christine went off to wood carving classes and carved a beautiful fireplace, which is in this room here now. But other than that, we didn't do a lot of renovating. We had plans, but life was busy, and we didn't get involved in the renovation. Just planning for it. We had an architect friend come and have a look at it. All those sorts of things. And then we started then to think, we're on this military road, and the house had been found for us by Pat Bates-Brownsword, and we'd flown over come over on the train and flown back one of those things from Melbourne and had a look. We stood in the middle of Military Road and looked at it. That's how busy it was, no traffic. And we thought, yeah, this would work. It was a nice house, right opposite shops, conveniently located. So we bought it, and we bought it for a reasonable price. Compared to our Melbourne houses, I think it was about 40 or 45,000 again, 42 maybe, I don't know, can't remember. But it was a good house, good buy, good location. But when we were living there, what happened was, first there was a heat wave the first weekend we were there, and we just both sat there and said, oh, we made the wrong decision, it was so stinking hot. But anyway, that aside, the developments at North Haven were just starting, and there were trucks rumbling down Military Road, and then when the houses were built, there was traffic rumbling down, and we thought, well, we'll get off Military Road. We liked it here, the kids were happy at the school, Naomi was happy at the school. Brett was never happy at school, I don't think, unless he was tearing the place up. But we had a look at various houses in Largs Bay, went to auctions and just didn't get them. And one day we saw a big old house in Plympton advertised, and it had a bowling green at the side, and we just said, oh look, we'll go and look, because we would go and look at old houses. And we went and looked at this old house, and we both thought, oh, isn't it wonderful? But we never thought in our wildest dreams we'd ever get it. It'd be too expensive for us. And it probably was, because we thought, oh, well, we'll go to the auction and have a look. We talked to the owners. The house looked beautiful. It was in very nice shape. It had just been painted. It didn't look like it needed any work, not to us. There was a flat being built onto the back 2 rooms of the house, which we thought, well, we could live with that. It would help pay for the place. But as we didn't think we were going to get to buy it, anyway, I came to the auction, and Christine just said, oh, well, you go along, just see what it goes for. Well, yeah, it went for $275,000, and I was the highest bidder. And the last bid was $5,000. The bidding just stopped dead. And no matter what the auctioneer did, he couldn't get $1 more out of anybody. And at $275,000, it really was a bargain of a lifetime. But of course, then we had to work out how to pay for it. And we knew that we had houses in Melbourne, 2 houses in Melbourne. We had our house at Largs Bay, so we were pretty well covered. But we put our house on the market straight away. We got the same auctioneer who'd auctioned this house to be an auctioneer. On the day, he got a bid of, I think it was 112,000 or something like that. And I thought, well, okay, 112, we'll take it, sort of thing. But he closed the bidding, said, no, we haven't reached the reserve. And I thought, no, well, don't you talk about this? And I said, well, why didn't we talk to the highest bidder? He said, well, there was no higher bidder. He said, there were no bidders at all. I said that the birds made a few bids, the trees made a few bids, and the back fence made a few bids, but nobody actually bid on the house. So we endured 8 months till the house finally did sell, for nearly what we wanted for it in the first place. But in the meantime, we had been paying 23.75% interest on the overdraft that we had to take out for this house. We finally decided to move into the house. It was empty. Well, we thought, well, we need to be in the old house with our furniture. And in the end, we said, oh, bugger it, we'll move in here, which we did. And about 3 weeks later, the house sold. Must have looked better empty than it did full, which is a lesson. Anyway, we moved in here, but we had to sell both our houses in Melbourne to pay the interest bills and get the mortgage down a bit. We still have a mortgage, but we have transformed the house and our lives, I suppose. It's a beautiful old house, and we've spent the last 30 years renovating it. We're getting close to the end of the renovations. The mortgage continues to grow rather than get smaller because we've got final bits and pieces to do. Our children have grown up. Naomi's been married to Andrew, who's doing this photography, and he's like a son to us. We don't always like him, but we love him all the time. But then that happens with everybody, doesn't it? You don't always like your kids, you love them. I certainly didn't like Brett's behaviour when he was a kid, but we loved him. We grew to love him like a son, and he is. But the house is an ongoing passion for Chris and I, and we'd love to see it still here in another 100 years. It's 150 years old. It's set in a beautiful setting, and its location, 10 minutes from the city and 10 minutes from the sea, is just great. It's been a great boon to us in our lives here, and if you want to know the rest of our lives, well, you'll have to look for another instalment, but I think this has gone on as long as we possibly can, and for now, and thank you to the chief cameraman, producer and director, Andrew Clasm, and with the assistance of Naomi Clasm, his wife, our daughter, and their 2 children for remaining quiet while this has all gone on. They have a 6-month-old baby, Nicholas Anthony, who's staying with us at the moment from Queensland. They're from Queensland. Both our grandsons are Queenslanders, which is quite a shock to us because we're not too sure about Queenslanders, but there you go. And so it's been a very pleasant thing, and thank you very much.